This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
All right, so this is the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership, and it is Thursday, December 22nd at 6:07 p.m. So because we have some guests, I thought we could just go straight to them on the agenda. We can always go back to the other items like the November meeting minutes, which I sent out about 20 minutes ago, so I apologize. And I know that Jeff, Jamie, and I were all at the planning board meeting on Tuesday, but I don't think Shira and Kate were. So it might be helpful to just give a little bit more of a, like a little bit of it. You don't have to do the whole thing that you did on Tuesday, but like a little brief sort of overview of the project, number of units, that kind of stuff. I think would be really helpful.
Great. And do we have the ability to share screen?
So I was just going to ask for. I can put up.
I'll make you a co-host.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
All right.
Brian
should be able to share now.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to, Brian? Do you want to pull up? So yeah, as far as I can talk a little bit to kind of set it up. I mean, there is the overarching development plan here that you see, which is a multi-phased plan. And I mean, I find that it's good business to kind of educate. And in a situation like this, the entire parcel is all being permitted at once, both the commercial and the housing. That is not always the case, but in this case, and based on the zoning and the permitting and everything, it works out quite nicely. I believe both the smart growth and the multi-building elements in the R15 district. But I think that we could just focus a little bit on the affordable side. And so let's see, Brian, I think you have it. Is it up for everybody to see?
Is there a way to make it, it only shows up as like a little square on mine. Is there a way to make it bigger?
Entire screen, present.
I have a hard time sharing because.
Oh, you know what it says, Brian? It says.
Brian, if you can make your window narrower, it will. It should.
If you click on the that present now, it says make your presentation the entire screen.
Oh, something's hiding. Hold on. Sorry. I'm also not a Google Meet person.
Yeah.
Kate, there's like feedback on your end. Can you mute yourself? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Any better?
There's a place where it should be able to say, you click on that arrow up and it says your entire screen versus a window.
That's what I keep doing.
Okay, let's see a tab. Yeah, I don't know. Well, let's see.
I can try to, if you're sharing that graphic, you had sent it out earlier. Let me see if I can get it to work from my screen.
Sorry, I have this really long, skinny screen and doesn't share very well.
Yeah.
That's
all right.
Okay.
So, but I will kind of, while we're getting that figured out, talk a little bit about, the one thing that came up in social media and questions before the meeting was the difference of the requirement of 35 units of affordable for the permitting versus.
Can everyone see that?
Yep, that's better. Yeah. So the requirement of 35 units of affordable versus the intent to kick off the housing portion would be a much bigger number of affordable. and honestly, the economics to develop households or 3-bedroom household units in this market it really almost requires a certain amount of subsidy to be able to build housing units in a high cost market to build, but a low market area in terms of rental. And of course, it's disconcerting for people to hear that we're not in a high cost market for rental when we are, but not compared to the rents you can get in the Boston market to help offset the development costs. Okay. So in Western Mass, there are a number of communities where you may have the ability to pay for the development of pure market rate multifamily, like in Amherst, or I really can't think of too many other places where the market rents, unrestricted, and in many cases student housing, can make the economics work to pay what it costs per square foot to build housing. So the state financing mechanisms that are left as an option, the primary one being the low-income housing tax credit. And so I didn't get deep into the weeds with what the low-income housing tax credit, how it structures deals, but for this group, I think it's worth covering a little bit of that. And that is, ever since 1986, when there was a major tax rewrite under the Reagan administration, they created a public-private partnership for funding affordable housing in the country. And what that public-private partnership consists of is the low-income housing tax credit, where a corporation, let's say Google, has a tax burden with the federal government. And one option they can do is, instead of paying $1 million a year to the IRS, they instead put $1 million worth of equity into Sierra Vista Commons through a very complex process that acts as essentially equity straight into the development of these buildings. And so it's a 10-year tax credit, and they pay it all up front. So imagine we close on our financing, we would get near $10 million of equity to build the buildings, and Google would actually own 99% of the building, and they would get the benefit of all of the depreciation and the paper losses that are often tax losses for when you have a housing with rental income and everything else. And as a result of all of that, we are able to build a building and charge a reduced rent. That's the simplest it's a complex thing, but that's the simplest way to put it. Shira, go for it.
Sorry, who's Google in this analogy? Like, are they a company or like the state?
Yeah, Google's a company. You pick a big company, Apple Computers, right? They buy tax credits.
They buy the credit. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I would say, Peter, like when you explain this in public at the planning board meeting, I would not use Google as your example.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I feel like this happened at another project, and people really latched on to like, you're working with Google and Google's going to like, so I would just like, I appreciate the depth, but I would simplify it for public consumption.
That's good feedback. And so, the idea of using a recognizable company, but whether it's an insurance company or any private company that has a large tax obligation with the federal government who uses the low-income housing tax credit
to offset their own.
offset their taxes.
Oh,
So
And you're
okay.
not picking the company, right? Like, it's not like you, the developer, are picking this giant company.
right, so
as far as I
exactly.
understand, right?
It's right. The way it works, and I appreciate that we can maybe get into the weeds a little bit here, only because people will ask you how this works,
Mhm.
and it's important for folks to kind of understand it
Yep.
a little bit. There's what are called syndicators. So what happens in the tax credit program is Massachusetts gets allocated a certain amount of tax credits based on the population of the state. And then the state of Massachusetts holds a competition, which we apply for to get that kind of $1 million a year for 10 years. So, you get your allocation, and then you work with a company that plays a matchmaker between your affordable housing deal and all the different companies that are out there who want to buy some tax credit deals. Sometimes you're part of a fund where it might be 10 different companies have invested in a fund that own your deal. But in other cases, it might be a proprietary situation where, one company kind of owns it. But you're right. It gets deep in the weeds very quickly. But the reason I wanted to bring you into that world order is this competition is very fierce.
Right.
And it speaks directly to the question of whether you have a mix in your development of pure market as well as 60% affordable, 80% affordable, 30% affordable. Is in markets like Cambridge, Mass, an investor wouldn't bat an eye if the development had 10 or 15% of its units market rate, because they're essentially assured that they're not going to have vacancies in those market rate units. But in a market like Easthampton, the market rents are so close to the tax credit allowed rents that they would be skittish and they would give us less money towards the deal. So you end up having a gap because you're not getting as much equity as you might have if it was 100% affordable.
Okay.
Now, the beauty of what we're proposing, and again, we have some time before we have an opportunity to apply again to the state, but what we're proposing is a 54-unit development project, the first 3 buildings, and in that there would be 10 units that would be funded through Mass Housing's workforce program, which is eligible for folks who make between 80% and 120% area median income. The other 44 units would be for tax credit affordable. Now, about 1.5 years ago, they changed the tax credit rule to allow a very complicated thing called income averaging, where you could it used to be that you only could rent to people below 60% area median income.
Mm-hmm.
They've changed that now to allow for you to rent to people below 80%, as long as the average of all of the people in your deal are at 60%. And if you have to have 30% folks, as required by our state's competition, it means that you could have some folks making as much as 80% and still be qualified for tax credit. I did not mention that at planning. I don't plan on mentioning that really at all, because it's an option, and it has to do with the management company's ability to kind of manage all of that well, and all of that. But the real point is it's a perfectly suited rule for a place like Easthampton where there's such a lack of quality housing that folks who are over 60 might well say, yes, I'd sign me up for a 3-bedroom unit, even if I have to income qualify, because it's going to be in a great school district, a great community, and there's nothing else out there. And,
Right.
and so that's kind of where we're at. So the development, the other important things that we didn't go into deeply on Tuesday, but we will cover some more on the 3rd, is that the design review for affordable housing in the state is robust. So these housing units, the stretch code alone to build a building today is so much more energy efficient than was allowed even 4 years ago, and 10 years ago, and 20 years ago. It's just a sea change as to how tight the building codes are to make efficient housing. And then the Department of Housing and Community Development, not only will they be awarding us the tax credit allocation, will also be seeking several $1 million of what they call, grants or soft debt. And with that, there's affordable restrictions, as well as a whole lot of eyes on the prize for, what is the level of finish in the buildings? Is it, the handicap side of it, the energy efficiency of the windows, the siding, you name it. There is an enormous army of architectural eyes on this. And so that, again, that bodes well for the community, because it is very different from somebody throwing up, the absolute, makes code and that's it kind of scenario.
Great.
I don't know if there's some questions at this point, but that I did want to at least lay that part out.
Kate, did you have a question before?
I think I'm very behind in really understanding this, to be honest, at all. Like I don't. So I have to say on this committee, I'm very focused on affordable housing, but this is much bigger than affordable housing. It's an investment for people who are wanting to make money. It's good for Easthampton in other ways, but I'm trying to understand how affordable housing is sliced in. But I feel I need to learn a bit more on my own.
And Kate,
So
I would just say, yeah.
Yeah.
I would just say, don't focus. I think it's helpful to have the weeds, but I think what Peter said, it's a very competitive process. They're applying to the state of Massachusetts, to the state. DHCD is going to figure out how to award the credits. I wouldn't get too worried about the investor piece. That's really hard for people to understand.
Right.
Yeah.
But in terms of a lot of people are talking about this, for instance, and so I feel invested personally because of affordable housing, but I'm just trying to sort out how to speak to that issue. But I have to do a lot of homework on my own. So it's okay.
I think Jeff had a question, and I would say that I jumped into the deep end, Kate, with a certain amount of assumptions of folks and what they might know if they're on the partnership. But I was warned by good friends and coworkers that I go deep in the weeds. So I will bring it back to the 10,000 foot level here after Jeff gives a comment.
Thanks. So I was just going to kind of echo what Kate was saying. Is I think a lot of people have to catch up to understand how affordable housing actually gets built. So Kate, I don't think it's just you. I think it's a lot of people need to understand this. Easthampton hasn't had a project since 2015, and those deals and the tax credit program, if I don't even know if they were used for that, would have been a couple years before 2015. So we as a community don't have a lot of experience with this. So I think everyone's going to have a lot of catch up. I think that's part of what Peter's helping with. The one thing I would say is that the way Peter described it, I think, was a little bit just different. Like the state really administers the tax credit program. So it's not like this is going into the private market world to grab stuff that's like really tangential, like the DHCD administers it. So that's really the starting point.
Right.
And Peter, I think like as you continue through either this discussion or future discussions, I think making people understand how common it is for projects to access the low income tax credit program. Like it's basically part of the stacking of the money for every project that like you hear about, like the one in Sunderland getting built, you know, the ones in Amherst getting built in Northampton all have low income tax credits like as part of their pro forma or whatever. So
that's right.
It was just, I think it was a backwards introduction to it. The complex part came really first.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. And now I don't know, Jonna or Jamie, if you can take what I put up there and share that bigger as well. But that was the presentation that I walked through at the planning department meeting on Tuesday, because what it really did was talk about the rents, the income levels, and how they related to what we were doing, which for Kate, that might be, you know, that's really the crux of the matter. And so whether it shares or not, I can tell you what it is. Basically, right now, the rules. Yeah.
Can you try sharing just the window rather than your whole screen?
Okay. Let me
and
see
that
if I
might
can
make it large.
I noticed that I had to pin it. Like I see all everyone's bubble, and then I had to pin this screen up, and then it's bigger.
I just pinned it and it made it a little bigger. Is that right?
Oh, okay, that worked.
Okay. And then I can make it, okay. So you might not be able to see that too well, but that's proposed rents versus required rents. And I can share this. It's in the package, I think, with the town, but 80% AMI is the income required to be on the state's subsidized housing list, and is what the zoning requires, or the permitting requires you to have your affordable at 80% or below. And in Easthampton, a 2-bedroom unit at 80% is $1,694 is the allowable rent to charge. And that is based on a household of 2 having an income of $60,000. So what we are proposing with the 60% tax credit rent is a rent of $1,270, which is almost $400 cheaper, a little over $400 cheaper than what the town requires. So that is an important takeaway, that our affordable proposed is lower than the requirement by the town. And in fact, this next slide, I'm going to try to make a little bigger, is even more so. So you show that the required affordable 80% city requirement, a 2-bedroom is 16. What we're planning is $1,270, which is a $424 a month cheaper. The current area market rents was based on a sample of rents available that, you know, through Craigslist and through all the different sources you could find rents listed. And it's a $500 savings. And when it comes to the 3-bedroom units, it's like $1,000 almost. It's $980 cheaper to rent an affordable unit through the program we're proposing. I'm going to just quickly scroll to the next ones. In that 54 unit development, that we are proposing, 16 units would be below 30% area median income. So that means those units would actually come with a voucher attached to the development to allow for somebody at 30% AMI to afford to live there and still allow the developer owner to pay the rent or to pay the mortgage. So they would only pay 30% of their income in rent, and the rest of it would come from the voucher. And then that would allow the mortgage to be paid. 28 units of the 54 are designed to be for 60% AMI. And in fact, in the budgeting that I do, I budgeted at a reduced amount. So the 60% rents that I mentioned, the 1270, for our budgeting purposes, because it's not as strong a market, I will underwrite it at 95% of 60% AMI, so that there's a little bit of a cushion for, primarily so that people aren't rent burdened. The deal is if you have housing units and the 60% rent is unaffordable to the market that you're trying to serve, you will end up in turnovers and folks moving in, but then paying 40 or 50% of their income in rent. And it's a struggle. So we underwrite it in a lower than 60% in a market like this, because we want to have stable tenancies. And then the 10 units I mentioned at the outset of the thing is the workforce program. Now, the workforce program, this and all of it is proposed. So, it may be that we end up with 54 affordable, and because of that income averaging I talked about, the entire project can cover people up to 80%. But I think the important thing to realize for this group and for the community at large, to Jeff's point, is it is very competitive. Almost any and all affordable housing built in the state and the country relies on the low-income housing tax credit program to do it.
Right.
So it is incredibly commonplace. And the Parsons Village project was low-income housing tax credit that was developed by Valley CDC back in 2015. And the Cottage Square was 100% tax credit. Right in downtown. Lumberyard in Pleasant Street in Northampton is tax credit. Live 155 across the street, right by Sylvester's, that's a tax credit development. Up on Hospital Hill in Northampton, couple of beautiful buildings that the community builders built that are all low-income housing tax credit. It's the quality is amazing, really. And the reason being is across the nation, politicians of both parties are super behind it, and they'll go and they want to be able to take anybody to an affordable housing deal that's a tax credit deal, and for them to feel like, wow, this is affordable housing. And I mean, that's essentially the storyline. But it's always hard when people come, are not exposed to it.
And I think, Peter, that's a great point. And I think it's for the partnership, like, really important to remember, like, Parsons Village is a tax credit. They're charging these rents.
Right.
So even though you might look at these rents and say, oh my God, that's way out of whack for Easthampton, you have to remember they're brand new apartments. So they're going to be really high quality, and they're consistent with the other tax credits in the city and around us, because they're all using the same formula to set their rents.
That's
so
right.
I think it's just important to remember, like, okay, it's not really that crazy out of whack, because this is what all the other projects like it around us are doing.
That's
and
right.
charging.
Yep. And now this slide that I had and I shared at the meeting the other night it's essentially data straight from the MHP Center for Housing. And I know that CHAPA met with the group here, to kind of help create the Housing Coalition. And some of this is some of the same very data. But basically, it's really to say that most people in Easthampton who rent pay less than $1,500 a month in their rent. And if you notice that, so we're right in that sweet spot for where the market is. And that's kind of why I underwrite at a lower than 60% rent. So it says, I'll go through the bullet points, but 80% of renter households in Easthampton make less than $75,000. Over 50% of renter households earn between $25,000 and $75,000. And then how that stacks up against, the rents available, more than 95% of renter households pay less than $2,000 a month. 80% of renter households pay less than $1,500 a month. And yet 40% of renter households are rent burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income in housing costs. Kate, you have a question? Yeah.
So when you say a household, how many people are you including, say for the $2,000 a month?
Right. So
how many?
For the households, this doesn't get into that detail, although it does in a different section of their data. What you have to realize is whether it's a household of one or two, the kind of how the household size lays out against the demographics of town might be different from one community to another, but it doesn't change the fact that over 40% of households are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. So good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I do know that when it comes to rental rates, as I kind of had mentioned in the, let me see what this last slide is. Yeah, I'm just going to go back. Here, there's different incomes and different rents based on the size of the household. So to qualify for a 3-bedroom rental unit, you have to have at least 3 people. So you have to qualify for the size unit you get, which is another tricky thing that people don't stop to think about. You can't have a 2-bedroom with an office and live here. You have to have a need for 3 bedrooms. And so that could be, grandma, mom, and a child, it could be a couple with a girl and a boy that are certain ages apart that require the 2 bedrooms. But here, a 60% household of 4 is calculated to earn $56,000 a year versus a household at 80% of area median income is $75,000. Let's see. And then so I should have put the 100%, income of Easthampton. I did not, but I could do that another time. And then this slide really just shows the unit make, the layout. So we have 3 1-bedrooms, 15 2-bedrooms, and 36 3-bedrooms. That's what makes up the 54 units. And that essentially is, each of these 18-unit buildings has 1 1-bed, 3? Oh yeah, 5. Sorry, 5 2-beds. Thank you. And then what is it? 12
threes. Yeah,
12 threes. And so there is efficiencies in that. And one of the things I know the smart growth standards require breaking up the massing on the building, heights and roof line differentiators, which are all going to be, done. And then one of the other things is, there's going to have to be like a continuity between all these buildings. So while they'll look the same, there'll be different colors, some different materials, just to kind of help break it up. But again, meeting the DHCD guidelines and their rules is going to be critical.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I just wanted to clarify the intent is to build the affordable housing units in phase 2 of the project, and then the market rate units in phase 3 and 4.
Actually, the market, the option, of course, is the beauty of building the affordable as proposed in phase 1 is you're meeting all the needs and the requirements of the planning approval. You're more than meeting those, right? But the market at the end of the day is going to have to speak to the further phases, and it could in fact speak to additional affordable, even as many as 2 other phases of affordable mixed use housing. And in those cases, maybe it's 4 buildings are the next phase, and maybe of that 54 are affordable and 18 are market, but they would be all part of a different entity. And I'm glad you asked that, because the overall site plan is structured in such a way that it will have essentially leases, a master lease, and a condominium kind of structure, so that whether it's a condominium or a ground lease, that's up for the lawyers to decide. But basically, those first 3 buildings that are owned by, company XYZ has the majority stake in it. And at the end of the compliance period, they go away, and it goes back to the local owner, the presenter, Frank and Sage Engineering. They control the development, they control the housing, but on paper, the owner is that tax credit buyer. And that's it's kind of confusing, but so basically you have 1% of the deal is owned by, let's say, Frank, but they control the deal. They manage it, they run it, they're responsible for it. So there's the local context there. It's not by any means, a company out in, Seattle who, is dealing with the management. That would be the managing member is Frank and team. The owning member for tax purposes is some company to get the tax benefit. But in order for that to work, they'll have a master lease around those 3 buildings, and that'll be an entity unto itself. And then the next phase might be 3 buildings or 4 buildings, and it'll have a different master lease around it. And then so as the phases go, and as the market demands, and as we, hone in on both the absorption of the units and the ability to compete for the money from the state, that'll kind of be determined somewhat by that. There were other questions. I think.
Yeah, Shira, you're ahead of me.
Yeah, I know that I've seen the number, but I can't remember offhand. So it's 54 affordable units, and then how many market rate units?
Well, that's kind of similar to where Jamie was just asking. So if the total unit count that is being approved at planning board would be, I believe, is it 202? Yeah, 202 altogether.
Okay.
And so the first phase is going to be 54, and of that, 44 below 60% AMI, and the others would have a deed restriction that goes up to 120% of AMI. And then the next phase may well be another 54. So and that's where it kind of depends. And this is where, it's, I'm the affordable housing development guy. I know how this works and can get done. But, nothing would stop, the owner to be able to do a building that's all market, with a beautiful view. But there are rules within that ground lease I mentioned. Like the idea that, think of it as a condo where you've got 3 buildings, they're all contained. And even if you have unrestricted market in that, they all have to look the same. They all have to have the same amenities, the same countertops, and all of that. If in a phase 5 years from now, there's the ability to build a one-off building, that has 8 or 10 or 12 units, that is, at a higher level, that's kind of just the rights of a building owner and a landowner. And it might be a market rate unit that is higher, of a higher value. But when you're getting any kind of money from the state and you're doing kind of the affordable housing program we're proposing, you have to have everything be the same quality.
I was happy to hear that the second or the third phase could include more affordable units, because one of my concerns when I originally saw the plans were that all of the affordable units were in the first 3 buildings, mm-hmm. and that the rest could be market. And I was curious, I mean, you sort of explained this already, but I mean, I was worried, would DHCD approve that? Typically in an affordable housing project, they want the affordable units mixed in with the other buildings, so, I mean, you've kind of already explained it, and I appreciate your response, but that did give me pause at first, that all the units might be in the same building.
Right. Yeah, no, it is, you're right that, there's a couple of things, throughout the country, developers, depending on the market, can do affordable and market all in the same building. One of the things that investment community that I mentioned, which is critical to making this work, if the market is too close to the affordable, they get antsy. The idea being that if somebody could go and get an unrestricted unit for $100 more a month, they would forego income certification and all the kind of privacy issues that somebody might have with that. And it gets very complicated for lay people to understand, if you will. But it really becomes critical that you're not undermining all of that equity that came in to make it affordable, that you don't want to undermine it by having some market units that are only a few $100 more, and it allows people to forego the income qualifications. I think we're a long way in this marketplace, a long way away from saturating the market with quality housing. I mean, there's been so few housing units built for so long that it's, we should be fine.
Right.
Yeah.
My other just 2 sort of questions, and then I think, if anyone else has questions, we should ask them now. And then I have some observations from Tuesday and sort of thinking about what our next steps should be as the partnership. But my other 2 questions, the second one, I just completely forgot what the heck it was. Oh, it wasn't a question, it was a comment. Just back to the investor piece. I appreciate the weeds here, but I would be very cautious about talking about who owns the building and it's owned by an investor, because that happened during Parsons and people really latch on to that it's like an outside investor and they don't live here and they're going to own the unit. So, I mean, I get it, but I just, you know, if it comes up during the planning board, I would just be very careful about like talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I don't think, I can't remember at Tuesdays if I mentioned.
You didn't, but I've seen it go south badly, and I just don't want people, because they'll just get really confused. And Jeff has his hand raised, but my one more question, and maybe you can comment on this after, is just I'm curious about the name and where it came from, and it did come up on Tuesday, and so I do think I would consider something more locally sounding, but that's my 2 cents. Jeff, it's all you.
I'm curious. It looked like Brian was going to respond to that. I just on the ownership. My question, kind of at building off what Jana was saying, does DHCD get to understand the ownership structure as part of what they do? Like, is that common? Like, so
that's
the idea of the ownership, the local manager, and then the management, that's all baked into what they see, right? Is that
absolutely
true?
Absolutely. In fact, I will. So, and I won't go there. I really took this opportunity with this crowd to kind of go a little deep, because, you know, it's important that over course of time, more people understand how it gets done. And some people perk up on the public-private thing because they like the fact that, oh yeah, you know, the business community is keeping everybody's nose clean, not HUD. And that's why this program came about. But Jeff, absolutely, like, you as a syndicator or investor in these deals, DHCD has final say, and you can't do business in Massachusetts if you're a dirtbag, and there are dirtbags out there. And so Massachusetts, the competition, the rules of the competition very strictly state that you cannot do business with a syndicator who follows X, Y, and Z, you know, which there are some nationally.
And I don't mean to belabor it. It's something for the planning board. You know, I see a parallel here with how the city has treated cannabis entities. So, you know, they change ownership over time,
right?
And it's been evolving. But then we have a condition on the planning board permit that basically says, you know, if there's a change of ownership that requires review by the Cannabis Control Commission, then the planning board is informed of that. And so I was thinking, like, not the underlying ownership of the tax credit, but more like, you know, your reference to the Frank or the local entity or the management company. Like, if something were to change there, would that have to get approved by DHCD?
Yeah,
along the way, because that might be what the planning board will want to do, is not the tax credit part of it, but like the local entity. If that were to change, we it's pretty common kind of condition where we would like to be introduced. You know, we would like to have the new owners come and introduce themselves to the planning board if something like that were to change, and if it's at a DHCD level,
exactly.
Like an ownership
that's the
at DHCD. That's kind of how we would hinge the planning board on that, and just
absolutely
over 10 years or whatever.
You might be familiar with Mass Docs, which is there is a set of documents, the legal documents that govern all of the state money that goes into these deals. And communities can participate in that. So if there is CPA money that goes into the deal, or any other kind of money from the locality, they can opt to be included in the Mass Docs process. So in other words, you become a member, the town of Easthampton becomes named in those legal documents as having essentially standing, if you will. And so, yes, the managing member, the sponsor group, you know, Sage Engineering or Tasty Top Frank DiMartinez, can't leave a deal and sell it to somebody else without it being approved by the state, and therefore the eyes are on it for the affordability restrictions and everything else. Yeah, so the state of Massachusetts also has a really strict rule, 40T, which prevents any sale of a deed restricted affordable housing without it getting vetted by the state. And in fact, a right of first refusal to be offered to a state designated entity. So like, if for whatever reason, before the compliance period was up, Frank wanted to sell, he could sell, and it would be through an approved process. And also I'm saying this now for Brian's side, it's fair market. It's not like you got to sell it at a fire sale. It is, you can sell it for what the property is worth, and affordable housing properties are worth fair market. I mean, there are enormous numbers of nonprofits as well as for-profits who work really well in this space in the state of Massachusetts. And, it's not like you're selling it at a loss or anything like that. Jamie, you had a question. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, there are two questions that are kind of related. So you had mentioned that there was a 10-year sort of for the tax credit investors.
Yeah.
My understanding is that these units were intended to be perpetual, sorry, that exceeds the 10-year for the tax credits.
Right. So that I can talk to that. And I owe Jeff and the planning board a copy of a draft affordability restriction. And I actually, just given the amount of things going on, I haven't reviewed I don't know whether the town's restriction, what the time frame is on it, if it's in perpetuity or not for those 35 units. But for the state money to win an award of tax credits, the affordability restriction is going to be at a minimum of 45 years. All right. And depending on the other pots of money that you receive to make the deal work, it can be 50 years or more. I'll just kind of, because I don't know, but if the town's requirement is in perpetuity, then again, those 35 units will have a deed restriction in perpetuity. Another deed restriction would be in place for the others. And you were a good listener, Jamie, you get the award. The 10-year tax credit thing, okay? This is, again, really weedy, but you picked up on it. So when an investor buys into the building for the tax credits, they get 10 years of tax credits, but the building has to stay in compliance for 15 years. And at the end of the 15 years is when that investor entity exits. And it can then run from that point on with, chances are it's going to have another, 20 or 30 years of affordability restriction on it. And it could just run like that. Or say another 10 or 15 years later, you need to invest more money in the deal to kind of make sure it stays up with the, properties and everything. And then Frank and the team can re-syndicate and once again go through a process of getting new tax credits to help refinance it.
I'll just, in a previous job, we managed a tax credit property and we were certified for the tax credit program. And I'll just say like that compliance period for the property management company is really intense. And there is a lot to lose if you mess up. And
Right.
So, and I'm sure that, Brian and Peter know this, but like there's a lot of compliance around making sure the tenants are eligible and all these things that you need to do. And that if you messed it up, you can end up owing money back because you were not in compliance. So it's a very rigorous program.
Right. And I mean, exactly. That's the kind of public-private teeth that essentially the Reagan administration wanted to see happen, was that private folks with money at stake were making sure that everything was done right in a market-based way. And so the property management companies that run these, if they screw up on one deal, say they manage 1,000 units or 1,000 properties for 20 different companies. If they screw up on one deal, they get a little bit of a black eye in the industry, so that they're not going to, it's everybody knows they got a black eye, even if they're awesome. So that's why it is incredibly well watched, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions?
If I could give people professional credit for anything, I'd love to, but I can't. If you need any certification points for learning about affordable housing, you've come to the right place.
I mean, I have some oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, Janet. I was just thumbing through the zoning, and it looks like we should double check, but it looks like under the smart growth section for affordability, it's a minimum of 30-year term, and then under the multifamily one, it doesn't seem like we specified. So we should definitely polish those up and take a look and make sure we're all understanding what those sections require. But and then I didn't know, Brian, were you willing to talk about the name at all? Were you going to say something, or is that?
I don't know if I want to be the one that defends it. The short and skinny of it is it's his daughter's name.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Yeah. Well, that makes it a little bit more understandable.
Paying homage to her. She's proven herself to be quite a hardworking young girl.
Okay.
Yeah. And a Division I gymnast trained at Roots.
Yeah, she was kind of the reason they started Roots Gymnastics. She went through there, got a D1 scholarship at Central Michigan, graduated there, and she's back there to med school.
Okay.
So I don't think he ever anticipated the reaction to it, but it was in really goodwill that it was named that. It wasn't the perception that people are taking where it's a Vista related item.
There was a bad reaction on Tuesday.
No, on social media there have been people who don't take to the name.
Yeah,
I mean,
I just keep thinking of Seinfeld, but it doesn't make me not like it. Makes me like it more, maybe.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, you might want to weave that in somewhere during the planning process about where the name came from, because I do think people then would be like, oh, because now they're thinking it's about the Sierra Mountains and what are they thinking? And so anyway, thank you for explaining it, Brian.
I made note of it. The opportunity didn't really present itself on Tuesday, but it will.
Yeah. Jamie.
Yes. You also mentioned CPA credits or CPA getting
funding.
Having participated and other projects participating in funding, and then that brings the city into the project as one of the, I guess, restriction, the holders, the restrictions. So
how does that work? Yeah.
Is that something that you're contemplating, ruled out, or?
Yeah, no, so for those of you who've been around this a little bit before, the state, they want to see local match. They want to see local dollars to show it. And the state is awfully smart. They know what everybody has. So I'll give an example. If you're doing an affordable deal in a community that doesn't have CPA or doesn't have any other funds, the state isn't going to penalize you for getting, a bunch of state dollars and no local dollars. But if a community has a CPA program where they have to put money towards affordable housing, then the state's going to want to see some match. And I believe I did reach out to some folks to get a feel for what would be viable. And again, with 54 units, something in the neighborhood of $200,000 or $300,000 would be the kind of award that would definitely check the box for the state and be well used for 44 units of affordable housing. Yeah, and then the CPA, of course, has its own deed restriction, right? And that would carry weight. And whether or not that triggers being part of the mass docs or not, that's kind of something we could work out with the attorneys. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we did for the Cottage Square development, the CPA, I think, put in $200,000 and was listed as the mass docs and as part of that
Exactly.
housing, the affordable housing restriction holders. Yeah. And I guess my comment to that is that, given the, it's I think I saw $25 to $30 million project.
Oh, you just froze.
So $300,000. Can you hear me now? A little. Okay. It's just that the 300,000 is a very small percentage compared to the project.
Right.
Even cost is. I'm not sure what the whole project is, 30 million. Then, it's still a small amount comparatively. Which makes sense to get some skin in the game for such a low ante.
Right. Yeah. No. The per unit the per unit cost it's still being worked out, but in this day and age, with the construction costs the way they are and legal costs and everything else that goes into it, a multifamily deal is in the $400,000 a unit and up. And so, and some of that, there'll also be a mortgage, like a permanent mortgage, on this to kind of that the rents will have to help cover. So, yeah, no, it's a tricky, it's a tricky time. Yeah.
I mean, I had some observations from Tuesday and like a couple suggestions for next time. And then, we can decide if you all would like the rest of your evening back. The rest of us could keep meeting and talk strategy about January 3rd for a little bit. I sort of leave it up to you. Kate and Shira, I would recommend watching the recording of the planning board meeting if you have a spare couple hours, only because I do think it is helpful to hear what people said. I think, from my count, it was pretty even in terms of people who spoke in support and people who spoke against. And then there were a few that were sort of like, I have a question. And didn't really necessarily say one way or the other while they were thinking. So that was really great. And I think we're doing a better job than we have in the past in terms of getting people out there to talk. Brian, I would suggest if you have gymnastics families that are Easthampton residents who use Roots, that you let them know that this project is happening, because I think it would be great to have a diversity of people there supporting the project. So they're going to hear from the affordable housing folks, but I think it'd be great if the planning board could hear from gymnastics families who are like, yes, this would be great if it was in Easthampton. I would love it to be here, because I think that will help.
That's a really good idea, because the gymnastics program is very well received, and more so the daycare that the Roots Learning Center that's part of this says they're serving, I'm going to guess badly, but I believe across the board they have over 200 kids in their program, and there's waiting lists at all the locations.
So that would be the other thing, is like daycare families that are on the waiting list. And I mean, this is something that Kayam and I talked about. Kayam manages the Housing Coalition, which has a little bit more like grassroots advocacy than the partnership, but trying to get at Easthampton families who have trouble finding daycare, who haven't been able to find daycare, especially since COVID, like some daycare facilities have closed or And will Roots take infants, or is it just toddlers?
They do. They're infant and toddler.
So I would make that a big point, because there's not a lot of daycares in Easthampton that take infants. And so I would just get some of, if we can, I think we can help to trying to find those families who are on, had trouble finding childcare. But I think getting some of those people to the meetings would be really helpful too.
It's a great point, and I will definitely do that. I know some people have already even reached out to Roots based on the newspaper articles, trying to find out when, where, how to get involved.
Great.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up? Is there any preference for residents that will be residents of the community having access to either the Roots gymnastic or the daycare? Because I see that, there obviously be some synergies there, and maybe it's too soon to say.
I would say that's probably too soon to say, but I think their goal is to be of size to support the demand across the board. I don't think anyone would be opposed to the idea, but it's definitely a challenging one to implement.
Yeah.
Right. The other things that came up, just, for Shira and Kate, there were some environmental concerns. There's one neighbor who I think is going to be very noisy, that we'll probably hear from a lot. There was the open space folks are not so excited about the project, which is disappointing, I think. I think we have some work to do in terms of like how we messaging. The other thing that came up was really talking about like traffic is. I'm not even going to talk about traffic because you guys are going to talk about traffic for weeks.
Yeah.
But traffic came up, and but there was also some comments about character and the neighborhood and the fitting into the neighborhood character. And so I think the housing partnership and the housing coalition can really talk about that a little bit more, because in my opinion, character is like code for non-white. And so we don't want the character of our city to change. And so I think we need to figure out how we say that. And I personally want the planning board to hear one of us say that, because I want them to be aware of it, because I think we will hear it a lot. And I think it's the impact of that statement, regardless of what the person's intent was, is that we don't want those people, we don't want, the character to change. And the Route 10 corridor doesn't really have any character. So I think it's sort of a funny comment to begin with. But those are like my big takeaways and like my things that I think we need to like be ready for on January 3rd. I don't know if there's anything that you really want from us. Like, is there anything that you really need us to work
Well,
with?
one thing that, again, and the traffic is a perfect one. I mean, I think the takeaway people will understand, and even if they don't understand it and want to keep talking about it, which is fine, but it is that the Department of Transportation in Massachusetts is really going to be the one who makes the call. And their call is going to force the owner to do whatever they require to be done to meet the needs. I think we're fortunate that the attention DOT is giving the corridor is a good thing, and the working in conjunction with them is a good thing, and the potential for future MassWorks grants to be paired with the fact that affordable housing is happening. Those are all very good things. The other thing that, again, can't speak for Frank, but I know that he is very interested in interconnectedness in open space. There's a tremendous amount of open space at this property, and it as a corridor and a connector that there is really, again, too early to say, because you have to kind of have a deal to kind of go from there. But the idea of connecting walking paths through this site, potentially Eastworks. I mean, there is a river there to cross, but it's nice to think big about what could a river crossing look like in a network of trails. So yeah, and what was the other? Oh, the other, yeah, it was fantastic to see people come out in support of affordable housing. And actually my count was, there was like five neutral, 7 for, maybe 5 that were a little more naysayers. It was great though that the environmental folks, that some of them did acknowledge they don't want to see it be a conservation versus affordable housing. And that's, that's where, private land ownership in this country is what it is. If a conservation trust doesn't purchase it or a public group doesn't purchase it, it really becomes just that, somebody's private will. But
that's a good point.
Just one thing, you said you didn't want to talk about traffic, so I'm really sorry, but it's kind of something like Kate said about learning about affordable housing. I think there's a little bit of learning about traffic too, that we all have to do as a community, which is it's a little counterintuitive, which is it actually is going to have to potentially get worse before Mass DOT really takes it seriously and then advances their process forward. So what I heard is a little bit of notion is like, don't no, because it's going to get worse. But it's pretty bad. But if nothing happens in that corridor, if we don't get any new development in this corridor, we're going to get a couple crosswalks, which we definitely kind of need. But that's it. Then Mass DOT, it'll fall down on their list because it'll just be kind of that status quo. It's been that way for decades. So that's the counterintuitive. And I walk around town and I see people already. They're like, oh, well, traffic's going to be really bad. But that's what it takes is for there to be a critical mass that pushes Mass DOT to take the steps that they need to take. So as community members who are all walking around, town and getting, people want to comment, it's a counterintuitive thing that I think we as a group, like with the planning board, just need to make sure we're walking through that carefully to advance this in stages. And at a certain, I think what Peter said, at a certain stage, there'll be something that happens with MassDOT. But to say no to the whole project, it actually won't keep MassDOT interested. They're likely to kind of ratchet it back and just put in crosswalks, which the road needs more than that. So it's a little bit counterintuitive to hear that.
Jeff, do you think that the planning board understands that?
I think they do, but they're sitting in like the real hot seat. So they have to make sure that they get all the information and get fully educated and then make the decision out of that. So what I think we heard a lot of information on the 20th. I think we have a fair amount more information to gather on traffic, but I think once they have all the information, they can make the decision, in front of, in the face of people saying, don't, like, this is going to be worse. I think that they will get there. It's just what it will take in terms of information.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking because I'm just wondering, is there like a trusted city official that can speak about that? I mean, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else. I think what the traffic engineer hired by the developer, usually people are like, oh, well, everybody was a traffic expert on Tuesday, right? So everybody talked about their expertise on traffic. And I'm just wondering if there's like a trusted city person that could stand up and say, yes, they're right, because blah, blah, blah,
Yes and no. And I mean, I like in this world of traffic, it's the applicant's team has a consultant, and what the city would potentially do is hire a peer reviewer to have that highly advanced level of input given to the planning board, so that they have that, the balancing it out. But we don't know if that's going to happen yet, but that is one kind of potential option we see just to navigate that process.
Yeah.
Because traffic is one of the biggest issues. All the other things that we kind of talked about can all be solved. So can traffic, but it's just about like what will it take?
Well, nobody stood up and said, I don't want affordable housing. So that is actually rare.
Exactly.
They may have veiled it with other things, but so far no one has said, don't build affordable housing here. don't put this next to my house. They don't want development, but they didn't actually say, don't build affordable housing. So that.
Well, one thing that, it really is a neighborhood into itself. And, it is, I'm glad you mentioned that about the kind of code word for change the character, because, it's like, it's pretty hard to change the character of a community, and I mean, obviously Eastworks, once going from maybe a fairly abandoned place to a vibrant community, that's a positive change for character, and nobody probably saw it coming, or what have you. And, and this, again, I just think that there is more of a vibrancy opportunity, than the negative. I mean, especially given that the smart growth thing has been done. And if with the, both trail connections and sidewalks that are right there to get into downtown. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth saying that these buildings are going to be of a much more higher level than what is assumed. Just the 3-bedroom units are close to 1,800 square feet. I mean, these are really nice, brand new construction, state of the art, like Peter said, state of the art efficiencies.
I would maybe focus a little bit on the efficiencies next time too, because I feel like people picked up on that. Like, you didn't say they were going to be energy efficient,
right?
And
exactly. This is an opportunity to hear first what people are saying, and to some degree, the plan approval and what is required to get the permitting doesn't require all of that, but absolutely, again, the if people were to know the DHCD design guidelines in and of itself, they could appreciate it, and we'll make sure that comes up.
I guess I'd like to just add that I think from what I've been noticing is I think a lot of folks were kind of expecting the Stop and Shop development to eventually take place, and had sort of the most sort of expecting something to happen there. No one really expected it to just stay a field forever. And so I guess I don't know. There might be less opposition right now, just because it had already been permitted for a large development 10 years ago, and then that fell through. So I might think that there will be additional opposition as the meetings progress. That if the housing partnership and the pro-housing forces don't sort of keep the momentum going, that there's a possibility of getting, like, the oppositionists kind of keep that,
right.
They keep coming, whereas often the supporters will just show up and come to a meeting and then disappear. So, and this is going to be, I think, a long process. It's at least not 2 meetings and done. So.
I thought it was interesting that the gentleman who lives nearby, kind of made it important to say that he thought this was worse than Stop and Shop. It was a very strategic kind of, announcement from his perspective. But what I hear you saying, Jamie, is like the importance to make sure that it doesn't lose people's, mindset that there was a Stop and Shop permitted here. There can be other things, that this is basically pulling straight from a housing production plan and the intent of the community and not everybody in the community, because we know there are folks who just would love to have open space and that's it. But that is that's not realistic, and that's not sustainable either. So smart growth, multifamily housing is the smartest kind of housing to build versus single family housing in terms of environmental factor. And that is not a bad message to also come back to with anybody. if not that there wants to be an us v them, but that's just the fact. Multifamily housing is that's the greenest way to go. And in this day and age with the code the way it is, it's greener than it's been forever.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And I did think that the Stop and Shop development never crossed that stream. I think that they were entirely in the front section of it. So
right.
It did have provisions to cross the stream, though. There was there was bridges drawn to cross that stream, so it was never completely out of the picture, at least.
Yeah, but they weren't trying to permit that at the beginning.
Right.
They were sort of maybe in the future. And I think that, from Northampton Street, most of the residences are going to be lower elevation wise. So they won't, even though I think they're 3-story buildings with flat roofs. So they won't appear to be as tall, and they're so far set back that, it might also be nice to have a rendering of what you would see from Northampton Street.
Yeah, we're working on that right now, Jamie, actually, to kind of show a massing and also a perspective, because the 30-foot tall building, when it's 15 feet below the road, really only appears 15 feet tall at that point. And I think that if you can show the mountain in the background and how much of the mountain is or is not blocked from the road.
Right.
There were view shed studies years ago about trying to protect the view sheds of the mountain throughout all of Easthampton. So I think that's when people say character, they may be veiled racism and stuff like that, but it's also, I think, some view shed is also tangled up in that.
I can't resist, but just being mindful though that the prime view that people are talking about is driving down Route 10 going 40 miles an hour. So it's not the most pristine location to view Mount Tom. So I think we have to keep that in check. It's been zone highway business for 20 years, and buildings could go like right up to the street front, and they could be 45 feet tall. So it's like, we just have to be mindful that this was always kind of this area for development, not this prime area. Like East Street is, to me, East Street's like the flip side to that. Like East Street has the magnificent views of Mount Tom, and there's series of land that's preserved, whereas Route 10, you're going 40 and you might see Mount Tom, which is kind of nice to see, but it's not like the treasured location. Or I think somewhere in between that. Maybe that's a little like forward, but just those view comments have to be taken kind of with some kind of grain of salt.
But if the restaurant had outdoor seating, then you could look at the mountain while you ate food outside.
Which there is a patio shown for each of them.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Because what people are remembering is like, I went to Tasty Top or I went to the driving range and I sat outside and I looked at the mountain.
Right.
But that's not possible anymore. So, but if you could go to dinner and sit outside and look at the mountain, I think that would be very nice.
Yeah.
So it's 7:30. I don't want to keep you guys here any longer than you need to be. I think you're welcome to leave us.
Yeah, and thank you. And I would just say, anybody who has questions, by all means, let us know. We can, and we're Frank and Brian. They're very good to work with, and would work and meet with anybody, withstanding to kind of solve real issues. I mean, that's part of the effort here. And I think, as Dawn introduced at the meeting, Frank's a guy he lives close by. He's got a business. I mean, it really is it's named after his daughter. This isn't just a cash and grab kind of thing.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you joining us tonight and sticking with us. And I'm gonna ask housing partnership members to stay on for a couple minutes so we can talk next steps. But then we will be there. We will not abandon you. We will be somebody will be at every meeting going forward and make sure that we don't lose momentum.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you both for coming.
Happy holidays.
You too. Okay.
I would encourage you to watch the meeting, just so you can hear what people said, to try to, and I would encourage you both to come to the January 3rd meeting. And I'm going to prepare some comments based on some of the things that we heard on Tuesday. And I can share them with you before the meeting, but I wouldn't just, even just saying like, I support the project, I think is just continuously saying that is going to be really important for the planning board to hear. Does anyone have any other like comments or questions or concerns?
I just want to say, can I just say something about this?
Yes.
I support it in general. I am a little bit skeptical about some parts of it and a lot of it is I don't understand it. Some of the language, I think some of it is in the presentation, that they're speaking in terms that are off-putting in part. It's very corporate. So to try to distill it down to affordable housing, which is my personal concern, it's just hard to get through the weeds of it all because it's not just about affordable housing. It's about lots of other things. So I personally feel a little bit confused about the project. And I just have to say that out loud.
I think if you watch the recording, you'll see their initial presentation that they made to the planning board. That might be helpful. I think he did like launch into this like very technical, and it's not helpful. And he should be very cautious about saying any of those things in public, because as soon as you start talking about investors and corporations and people
it's really off-putting.
It is, and it's very off-putting, and people latch onto that piece and get very upset. And that happened during Parsons Village, that people were really confused about the investors syndicate part, and like the fact that it was Valley CDC was completely lost on them. They were completely confused.
But this is different because this is not Valley CDC. This is a totally different model. So I think that's where I'm getting a little bit lost in it, is that it's a corporate model.
Well, he's a for-profit developer. I wouldn't say it's that different from Valley CDC. They're a for-profit developer. They're not a nonprofit developer. But they still develop housing.
And just Valley CDC does the same financial stuff when they're doing affordable housing. They're just also not making a profit on it.
But the profit part, I guess that's where I'm getting, like, he's naming it after his daughter. That's a lovely story, but it's like, it's not really about the person who's going to make a lot of money's daughter. It's really about, to me, it's about the community. So I think that is, if I'm feeling this way, I can only imagine, I feel like I'm a really rational person and I'm committed to affordable housing, but it's a little bit, there's just something that doesn't sit right. So it's hard for me to get on board in the way that I feel like I'm supposed to be right now. I just have to think it through and understand it better.
I think that's a really great point, Kate. Sorry, I don't raise my hand. You guys don't have to raise your hand. I just start talking. But I think it's a really good point, and it's important for us, I think, to be able to talk about that in public, right? So like, just for some examples, Beacon Communities is not a nonprofit, right? They're for profit, aren't they? Yeah. And so was the developers of 15 Cottage Street. So they were a for-profit company. So I think it's good for us to like be able to point to other examples of projects that were done by for-profit and nonprofit developers. So I think it's a good point.
Yeah. And just, I think the Cottage Square they are for-profit developers, but they specialize and only did, at least up till that point in time, their entire portfolio was affordable housing. Whereas I think the perception, Kate, that I'm hearing you say is that this ownership group is pivoting to affordable housing in a way that feels slimy, maybe.
I just have to be honest. Okay. That's my skepticism. It doesn't, I don't have a solid opinion. I just feel a little bit, there's a slimy feeling. Yeah. It's I just got solar panels on my house, and there's a lot of sliminess around that, even though I'm doing a good thing. It works for me. It's all good. but there's still the slimy factor that I've just had to deal with. But on this level, it's not about me. This is about the community. So it just, you know, I don't think he should name it after his daughter. You know, like for instance, that's symbolically kind of off, because that's not about. This is about us and the larger valley. It's not about. I don't know.
I think I don't know if this will make you feel any better, but I know like one of the challenges generally that I've seen in my kind of pretty limited. I mean, I've been doing this for a while, but especially when I used to work in Amherst, and there was definitely some period of time in Amherst where people felt like developers were just bad, right?
Yeah.
So like, and like it's hard because when you hear developers and then you hear profit, you know, those two things start to get people worked up a little bit. But part of it is that they are business owners. And so part of owning a business is inherently to not go into the red and not go in debt. And nonprofit developers still make a profit. Their profit goes to cover management and employees. And then when you're the private developer, there is a profit, because one of the things that I've learned, and it was mainly, if I'm not speaking too much out of turn, is the developer of the Ferry Street property, the amount of monetary risk that they take up front is scary, and it's big. It's like big investments that they're at the risk of over time. If things don't pan out, they could hit a loss and go bankrupt, and that kind of risk. But so this private developer and the profit thing I think it's always confusing to hear. But one of the realities that we see is that if we want to get affordable housing built, this is one of the first real opportunities since 2015.
I get that.
That partnership of the private developer who is pivoting, Jamie, I agree, but they're paying Peter Graham to figure this out. They're coming forward with permitting, and the commitment will be there. If they get the funding from DHCD, we'll actually have affordable housing built. And so it's a little bit of that balancing of what it might take. So in this case, like, they have the roots, and they are building some of the commercial development, because that's what that section of Route 10 kind of suggests you would do, and then the housing comes with it. So it might take some time, Kate. I just think that those two, I agree. Like all three things combined with the name, but the developer and profit, it's not inherently a bad thing. It's just the nature.
Oh no,
like
I don't think it's
world.
I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. It may have just been the way it was presented, but it's also, I've been reading about it. I've been trying to follow social media, because it's much bigger than just affordable housing. Like Parsons Village was about affordable housing. Like, that's easier for me personally to wrap my head around. That's, to me, it's like, I don't care who the investor is. It seems that this is a little bit more confusing, because it's multifaceted. You've got restaurants, and at some point he said something about, it could be something about the view in terms of housing, like that maybe the market rate would get more of the view or something. I couldn't really sort out what he was trying to say, but those nuances of something that's corporate, and I'm personally relieved that it's not Stop and Shop. It's not more cannabis. Like, it's something different. It's something that fills needs in many ways. So on the whole, I think it's great, but it's just those feeling like, is affordable housing sort of a convenience that's not going to be, that's going to get, I don't know. I don't have a well thought out opinion.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean to belabor it. The one other thing that came up a lot in the planning board meeting, and if you do watch it, you should be able to get a sense of it, but is the phasing of the project. So I think in their private developer hat, the first phase is the Roots facility. And that's what, if you look at their portfolio, which I haven't looked at a lot, they do have some senior housing, they have some market rate housing, and then they have these Roots facilities. That's like what they've done in the past. but their phase 1 is the roots. And I feel somewhat comforted to know that their phase 2 is the affordable housing.
Yeah.
Because the alignment of that is important because, and I guess I would say this with them there, but like phase 4, which is the last couple pieces of it, it's a couple mixed use buildings and a restaurant. Like a little bit of the risk that they're taking is who we don't know if we'll ever get to see a phase 4. They have to present everything all at once to show here's what we fully expect to do. But the phase 1 is the roots, phase 2 is the affordable housing, and then we hope that everything else comes forward eventually. But that could they panned out like 7 or 8 years for the last phase. And so if something significantly changes, we don't know if we'll ever get that. Obviously, if they change it a lot, it'll have to come back to the planning board and we'll understand what has changed. But I think we've begged them like through our zoning to like say, you need to tell us your full vision.
Yeah.
And that's kind of good that we see the full build out over 8 years. But phase 1 and phase 2 are the things I think we would keep our eye on as the critical things. And then the other units and then the other buildings would come later. But so there's always a risk that that stuff might not happen. If that's any consolation, but I'll stop. I just wanted to.
No, it's helpful. It's helpful.
I'm hearing it from people too. Even my wife's like, this seems so big, and I'm like reminding that it's over 8 years or whatever. That it's not everything all at once. And we did. And this is an anecdote. I know that they've talked to the fire department and the police department, and even with regard to the schools, because I think that didn't really come up yet, Jana, but. The first few units, right? So it's not nothing. I mean, it's a lot of units, 54, but it's not 202 all at once. So if we as a community start to encounter questions about the capacity of the school, this is 8 years to come to fruition.
Yeah.
It's not 202 units right at the same time. So that'll and then the fire department was very comforted to know that and the police department is that this would get phased over time. And so it's not like all of a sudden the police department would be overwhelmed with the, potential calls over there or whatever, any location, but it's the phasing that public safety was pretty comforted to know about. So those little things I would just add.
Okay.
I wanted to make a point. The package store gas station that got taken down on Cottage Street is another, it's some market rate, some mixed use, some affordable housing. It has some retail, or I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen on the bottom floors, but that is also another profit-driven development that is recently gotten approval in Easthampton and they originally got their approval back in, I think, 2017, and have spent a lot of time spinning their wheels on that property because they weren't working with someone like Peter Graham, who could really help them and advise them on the affordable housing piece of it, and really make that work for them. Peter Graham has an incredible, he's been doing this affordable housing for I think his entire career. He used to have a small business that was just doing the financials for the affordable housing, and then I don't know exactly how it happened. I thought they merged with Valley CDC, but then he might have left from that and is doing his own thing now. But the point that he has a lot of experience and is helping them navigate the process. And the other piece is that once they enter into these affordable housing restrictions, and once DHCD approves the low-income housing tax credits, the ownership is really stuck in whatever form is put onto that paper. And Peter sort of talked about this a little bit, but if they want to sell the property to a new ownership group, they need the Department of Housing and Community Development's not just okay, but DHCD actually looks into it and makes sure that the new owner really knows what they're getting into and isn't going to just let anybody with money take it over. And so I think it should be comforting in that it's not just where they're saying that they're going to build some affordable housing and building like low quality units and just trying to make, a lot of money. And they're describing units that cost $400,000 a unit to build, which is, it's not cheap.
No.
And that,
Well, and I work for ServiceNet, and a lot of our participants live on in Northampton on the old hospital hill, and I think similar kinds of buildings that are like sparkly and beautiful and solid, and they have security, and a lot of the people that I work with have certain issues around safety and paranoia, and so it's amazing that they can afford to live, that we've been able to make that happen. So I get that, I've seen it happen in real life, that these sort of fancy developments actually serve people who basically make $900 a month pretty well, which is good.
Well, and even the units, so there'll be units that are subsidized, and then there'll be all the rest of the tax credit units, which you could use your Section 8 voucher in. So folks who have mobile Section 8 vouchers that are living in Easthampton or Holyoke or Northampton or wherever could rent those apartments that'll meet the standards for Section 8. Yeah. So it's an excellent opportunity for those families to find a brand new unit that meets their Section 8 payment standards that they're income eligible for. So, it can be a huge win. And that's happened at Parsons Village. You have folks that are in the subsidized units. You have people renting it with their Section 8 vouchers. And then you have people that are just paying rent.
Yep.
All right. So I want to be conscious of the time. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm ready for the holidays and to be not working. Do we want to approve the November meeting minutes? Or if you didn't have a chance to look at them, we can look at them next month. But if we have had a chance to look at them and could get them out of the way, that would be fantastic.
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Am I allowed to second if I wasn't at the meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Seconded.
Okay. All right. I have to do a roll call. So all those in favor, Kate?
Aye.
Shira?
Aye.
I think does Shira have to abstain because she wasn't there? No, she can. Okay. Great.
Aye.
And I'm Jana. Aye. Great. So we will table our other discussion items until, next month. I did send a draft of a new description, but we can talk about it next month. I am planning to be at the January 3rd planning board hearing. I will connect with Kayam between now and then to fill him in. And I am planning I did speak last time, but I'm planning to be more prepared. I was kind of just talking last time, but I'm planning to be more prepared this time. And I'll probably try to go in person this time. And so I encourage everyone to also attend and even to just listen and just be in the room or on Google Meet.
And one strategy that you guys probably have not, you guys maybe have talked about, maybe it's a coalition thing, but if you feel compelled at the meeting to say something and you weren't planning on it, if people get up and are negative and then there's positive and negative, and then if there's 6 more people who are all negative, to be prepared to kind of balance that out. I think that it's just thinking about people, but if that's the last couple of things you hear is just all negative, it's just the last thing you hear, and that's kind of a little bit, it sticks as human nature. So I think Janet was correct. The last meeting was great. It was really balanced, but just in case, the meeting, because I think with the 2 Gazette articles and Kate, the social media stuff, I think as more people are oh, this is happening, I think we're going to get all sorts of opinions who are going to want to come to the next couple meetings. And so just being prepared to kind of balance it out to the extent you're comfortable with. But even if it's the particulars of the project, maybe not, but just the idea of the affordable housing or I think Jana's idea about having like the Roots facility and getting support for that component is really good too. So
I do want to say that I'm not, my sort of questions are not like for public, like that's not something I would say. These are not things I would say in a public meeting, because I don't really feel like it's helpful. I have to process it myself in this group, but I don't really feel the need to be negative or really anything other than neutral to positive in a meeting at this point. I just don't want anyone to worry that I'm going to do anything weird.
You're going to go rogue and stand up and say you don't approve the project. I mean, you are, well, Kate, you can say whatever you want, right?
I know, but I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm not like losing my mind.
No, but Kate, it's really good because I think it's just real. It's a real thing that you're thinking about learning about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like even for me, I do this. I'm in this mix of all this stuff happening all the time, but I do try to take a step back and realize, like, okay, so someone who doesn't think about this stuff all the time, all they're seeing is 200 units and like all at once, and they got stuck in traffic, on Route 10 the other day, like. The depth of even thinking about learning about it, like I'm glad that you're thinking about it and trying to learn, because most people are not. They're just going to have a topical reaction, and then they're gonna go off of that. So I applaud you for asking the questions and thinking about it, because it's not easy. It's kind of complicated stuff. So
Kate, a lot of what you said, I agreed with also about like everything you said about like not really understanding, and like maybe we need to go watch that meeting because I wasn't there either, but I felt a lot too. I was like, I don't really know what's happening right now.
Well, it's coming at a time when I just started, increasing my work hour, lots of things are happening. So I have not been able to focus on it. And I want to.
I did have one quick question about, I'm a little confused about like who is doing what. Like, so the guy, that Jeremy person is a consultant, and then Brian is the engineer?
The two people that were here tonight?
Yeah.
Peter
is the consultant.
Oh,
he's like their housing consultant.
Yeah.
And then Brian, is he like a partner?
Oh, he was
I don't know
there
who
on behalf
Frank
of
is.
Sage.
Yeah.
So like what's Furrow Engineering and then what's Sage?
Frank owns Roots and Sage Engineering, and also some other things. And he's and I guess Sierra Vista Comms is gonna be a spinoff of that he is also, and so he owns a bunch of different things. Furrow, I believe, is the architects, and they're not owned. I think they're a separate entity.
Hired out for the engineering or something. Okay.
But
So
Sage
who-
is Brian works
Frank-
for Sage, is my understanding.
Okay. So Frank formed this Tasty Top LLC.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So Frank's a developer who is constant. It sounds like he has many different businesses that he owns, and he's able to pull them together to work together to present, to make them do the development that he wants to. And then where he doesn't have that specific skill set, he's hiring out to, in this case, Peter and Furrow to fill those gaps in what he's able to develop or put together from his in-house team.
Okay. Thank you.
I could be wrong about all of that though. So, but that was my understanding.
I just have an answer. I feel better. It's fine.
Yeah,
Doesn't
it
have to be
sounds
right.
reasonable.
As long as I have an answer.
All right. Are we ready to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's
hungry.
7:55. We are adjourned. We can stop the recording.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.